Alright Bison Group, welcome to your basic training. This is going to be carried out in several parts. The first block is a basic orientation to infantry combat. In this class, we'll talk about the fundamentals of how an infantry unit fights and your role in it. This will be followed up by a few in-person trainings in which we'll practice some of these infantry skills on the ground. You will also receive instruction in close quarters battle from one of the training detachment's CQB instructors. For those of you who are civilians, pay attention. For those of you with relevant military experience, just use this as an opportunity to refresh your skills and help integrate with and train our civilian counterparts. Alright, so just a little bit about me so you know who I am. Now, I don't say any of this stuff to talk myself up or make myself sound special or anything like that. I just say it so you know I'm not some guy off the street who read about all this online. I've been a team leader, I've been a squad leader, and I've been a platoon leader in combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, I was not special operations or anything special like that, but I have personally led hundreds of combat missions, including things like patrols, ambushes, air assaults, and raids to find high-value targets. So again, I only say this so you know that I've done the things that I'm about to teach to you. Now, one caveat here before we get into the substantive material is that different units have different TTPs. Different services have slightly different TTPs. I will, for the most part, just be talking about general tactical principles which will apply no matter who you're working with. As for specific SOPs and TTPs that you'll be using, JTF Vigil may have further guidance in the near future. One last caveat. I know we have female applicants in Bison Group, and we are psyched to have you here. Just know that if I say things like infantryman, I'm not meaning to exclude you. That's just a doctrinal term for what it is. There are women in the infantry in real life. There are women who have been to Ranger School, so you are more than welcome here in JTF Vigil, and none of my language is meant to be exclusive. So with that said, this is our agenda. I'm first going to orient you to how an infantry unit is organized and how it fights. We'll talk about some fundamentals of what you need to do as an infantryman. We'll look at the formations you'll need to know, as well as how your team and squad are going to move together. The final things we'll look at are the actions you and your squad need to take upon making contact with the enemy, as well as how to communicate effectively. The most critical thing for you to understand is that no one fights alone. You've probably played games where it's normal to be running and gunning and going off and doing your own thing. Doing that in a tactical game means death for you and probably failure for your squad. You're going to be filling a specific role, and your group needs you to do that job. Now, the most basic maneuver unit is a squad. It's led by a squad leader who's in charge of 2 to 3 fire teams depending on whether you're in the Army or the Marines. Each fire team is going to be led by a team leader. Each member in that team has a specific role. Those roles are the automatic rifleman, who's going to carry a light machine gun, the grenadier, who's going to carry a 40mm grenade launcher in addition to his rifle, the rifleman, who's the most junior and simply carries a rifle, and one rifleman will be a designated marksman who carries a longer range rifle and optic. Now, in video games, these roles may not be a one-for-one match. If you're playing a game like Ready or Not, you will not have access to all these weapon systems. However, if you're playing games like Squad or Hell Let Loose, you will have the ability to equip and run a squad that is similar to real life. Now, it's important to understand how a squad fights. A squad is not a gaggle of individuals. Each fire team works independently as its own subunit of the squad. The squad leader directs the team leaders to move or shoot, and the team leaders direct their team members. When a squad fights, people do not go off on their own. There is always one stationary fire team providing fire support while the other team maneuvers on the enemy to destroy them. We'll cover that in a little bit more detail later on. But the key point is that the squad fights as 2 cohesive parts which support each other. Now, the next largest maneuver unit is the platoon. A platoon has more moving pieces and is capable of more complex maneuvers than a squad. It's going to be led by a lieutenant and a platoon sergeant. Instead of 2 cohesive parts, a platoon has 4. 3 rifle squads, each with 2 fire teams, and 1 weapons squad. Now, there are some differences between how the heavy weapons are integrated between the Army and Marines, but I'm going to go with the Army method because I think it's easier to conceptualize without having to talk about different companies, etc. Now, in general, the rifle squads will be used to assault enemy positions, deny terrain, or pull security for the platoon. The weapons squad will be used to support that assault element. You won't see this in smaller games like Ground Branch or Ready or Not. However, games like Squad and Hell Let Loose will have you operating at the platoon level. Now, the platoon's weapons element is important. It contains the platoon's most casualty-producing weapons because it carries the medium machine guns and anti-tank weapons. The weapons squad will typically be used to destroy the enemy in an ambush, destroy vehicles, reduce hardened structures, create explosive breaches in walls and buildings, and provide support by fire for the assault elements. Now, just like a squad fights as two cohesive and mutually supporting elements, the platoon does as well. Each squad and team has a job, and you need to understand where you and your squad fit into the plan. In the example of an ambush, you can see that each squad has been assigned a task. Third squad is broken into two teams and is tasked with securing the platoon's flanks. Alpha team is on the left, and Bravo team is on the right. The soldiers in these teams are not participating in the ambush itself. Their whole purpose is to prevent the platoon from being rolled up from the side while it's getting into position and lying in wait. The weapons squad is going to position the machine guns facing down the linear danger area. When the enemy enters the engagement area, the weapons squad will attack by fire and destroy as many as possible. First and second squads are lying in assault positions. When the enemy enters the engagement area, they'll attack by fire, then assault through and destroy any remaining enemies. In the example of a raid, you can see that you've got a similar idea here. Third squad is going to provide security. Their job is to isolate the target building so that enemies inside can't squirt out the backside, and they're going to prevent enemies from reinforcing the target building from behind. The weapons squad's going to provide support by fire to pin the enemy in the target building and prevent them from shooting the assault elements. First and second squads will get a foothold in the target building and attack to destroy the enemy inside. So in both of these examples, you can see that if any squad is not doing its assigned job, the whole operation will fall apart. It's also important to understand what all the roles in the squad actually are. The leader, whether the squad or team leader, has a few responsibilities: directing and controlling fires, directing maneuver, communicating with higher and adjacent. So for example, a team leader communicates with the other team leader and the squad leader. The squad leader is then going to communicate with the other squad leaders and the platoon leader. They also are responsible for maintaining security. So when you stop somewhere, that leader needs to be ensuring the unit maintains 360-degree security. So the leader is going to emplace team members and give them all sectors of fire. The automatic rifleman is probably the most important person in the fire team. The light machine gun is the squad's most casualty-producing weapon, and is the squad's primary source of suppressing fire. The grenadier, who has a 40mm grenade launcher, will also suppress the enemy, but the real benefit is that the grenadier can put explosive effects into places where bullets can't reach. For example, if an enemy is behind a stone wall or in a second-story room, the grenadier can put a 40mm grenade in the window or behind the wall. But it can also sort of fill the role of artillery and mortars, and here's what I mean. There's a concept called echelonment of fires. It basically means that the indirect fire support, like artillery and mortars, has to progressively get smaller as the assault element approaches the objective. That way, you don't accidentally kill the assault element. Eventually, you'll be too close for artillery and you'll be too close for mortars. At that range, you can lob 40mm grenades to provide a similar effect. Now, the rifleman is just a general-purpose infantryman with a rifle. They'll also often carry extra ammunition or potentially special equipment based upon the parameters of the mission. Now, usually the squad will have one rifleman filling in as a designated marksman. I like to joke that this person is like a discount sniper. They're a good shot and they've got some extra training. They carry a longer range rifle and optic and can put precision fires on point targets at a greater distance. Now, let's cover some fundamentals of being an infantryman. Your job is not to be Rambo and go off and boost your KD. Your job is to be an effective teammate. That means covering your sector of fire, even if it's quiet. It means putting fires where your team leader tells you to, and it means being ready to move when necessary. Your team leader will emplace you, but it's your individual responsibility to ensure that you are maximizing the use of cover and concealment at all times. You also need to make sure that when you're communicating clearly and concisely and conveying the correct information. And finally, that you are staying in the formation that you are supposed to be in. The next fundamental I want to talk about is concealment. Now, people often confuse concealment with cover, but they're different. They're both important, but they're different. Concealment will hide you. but it will not protect you from small arms fire. Cover, on the other hand, might conceal you, but it will also protect you from small arms fire. The effectiveness varies depending on the quality of the materials and the strength of the weapon shooting at you. Examples of cover include sandbags, stone walls, mounds of dirt, armored vehicles, and the wheel wells of passenger vehicles. The next fundamental is fire and maneuver. Your squad wants to always be shooting, moving, and communicating. We'll talk about those concepts in a lot more detail in future classes. However, just know that everything comes down to two ideas. First, once you're in contact with the enemy, you need to pin them in place with fires and prevent them from moving or shooting. And second, that no one in your squad moves unless someone else is firing. Moving without a support by fire is a good way to get mowed down. Now, this support by fire is called suppressing fire. Your team leader will direct you to put your fires in a certain place. For example, they might say to suppress the second floor. Now, a key point here is that you do not need to actually see an enemy. You can kill any enemies you see, but what you're really doing is shooting at known, likely, and suspected enemy locations. You're denying the enemy the ability to pop up and put accurate shots at the assault element. Now, this video is an example of what it might look like if my team leader told me that I was going to suppress the second floor. You can see that I'm firing into the windows because those are the places that are known, likely, or suspected enemy positions and where they would be able to fire out at an assault element coming to hit that building. Now, while one element is suppressing, the other element will be maneuvering. Some key points here are that you do not want to expose yourself to the enemy position while you are flanking. You want to take a bold flank, preferably behind some cover or concealment, and then only appear when you're in your assault position. The last caveat on this is that while you do want to take that bold flank, you don't want to get so far away that you can't support each other anymore. The worst thing that can happen is that Alpha Team gets into contact, they're pinned down, and then Bravo Team goes so far out to flank around that they get into contact and they get pinned down, and neither team can support the other. So let's talk about the formations your fire team will use. The default is the wedge because it's the most balanced. You can see that it's shaped kind of like a flying V. Now, the size and shape of this and any formation will expand and contract based on the terrain. In the open, or when contact is likely, you want to be spread out a lot, up to about 10 meters between people. As the terrain gets tighter, you might tighten up to 3 to 5 meters between individuals. Keeping this distance prevents multiple team members from being taken out by the same grenade or the same machine gun burst. Now, you can also see here in the diagram that the automatic rifleman is going to be on the opposite side of the wedge as the grenadier and the rifleman. This is because we want to balance out the amount of firepower on each side. This next point varies between units, but the doctrinal position, and what I've seen done in the past in my experience, is that the team leader should be at the front of the wedge for a few reasons. The team leader is the most experienced, and it allows the team to follow the team leader's movement with minimal or no communication. It also ensures that if the team has to get online, the team leader already has the AR and grenadier right in his pocket. Now, a file is much less desirable. This is basically just ducks in a row. It's easy to control, and sometimes you need to use it in very dense terrain, but it should be avoided when possible because it leaves you very vulnerable from the front and the rear. Now, the final team formation we'll cover is the line. Getting online lets the team leader mass all fires to the front, but it's vulnerable from the sides and the rear. The line is typically used when reacting to contact in order to gain fire superiority, or when setting up a deliberate support by fire. Just like teams have formations, squad leaders also have the ability to array their squads in several different ways. The default is the squad column fire team wedge. Just like the team wedge, this option is the most balanced between control, security, and firepower. A key point, though, is that you want to flip the weapons in each team to the opposite side to ensure balanced firepower. For example, you can see in the diagram that the automatic rifleman is on the left side of the team in the front, whereas the automatic rifleman in the rear is on the right. This ensures that no matter which side of the squad takes contact, there's always a light machine gun that can respond to it. The squad line is similar to the team line. It lets the squad leader maximize fires to the front. However, you should use caution getting the whole squad online. If the squad does get engaged, both teams will be committed at the same time. This is often used for a squad support by fire or as an assault position from which the teams begin bounding Overwatch, which we'll talk about here in a moment. The squad file brings all the same concerns as the team file and should be avoided when possible. If your squad needs to pass through dense terrain, I recommend you break into a staggered column when possible instead. I will go over that in greater detail in our in-person training. Now we need to discuss the way your squad is going to move. There are 3 basic methods: traveling, traveling Overwatch, and bounding Overwatch. Traveling is only used when speed is necessary and enemy contact is unlikely. As such, it will probably not be used in video games. Using the traveling method, the rear fire team follows 20 meters behind the lead fire team. The weakness of this method is that if the lead team is engaged, the rear team may be close enough to be pinned or destroyed at the same time. The default movement technique for video games should be traveling Overwatch. The only difference from traveling is that the rear fire team will be at least 50 meters behind. The benefit is that if the lead team is engaged, the rear team will probably still be out of contact and free to maneuver or reposition. The final movement technique is bounding Overwatch. You'll use this when you're in contact with the enemy or when contact is expected. It's the slowest method because one team will always be stationary. However, since that team is stationary, you'll always have a team providing Overwatch for the moving team. As you can see in the diagram, there are 2 basic methods: successive bounds and alternating bounds. For successive bounds, your first team will move, then your second team will move up parallel to it, then the first team will move, and so on. For alternating bounds, your first team will move, then your second team will move past it. Once that second team is in place, the first team will again move past the second team, etc. The last thing we need to talk about is your squad's actions on contact. The very first thing you're going to do is return fire, even before you run for cover. The reason is that you want to disrupt the enemy's ability to hit you accurately and hopefully gain fire superiority over them. Once you return fire, you'll move to the nearest covered and concealed position. You'll call out the distance and direction to the enemy. The squad leader will get that information from the team leader that's in contact, and then the squad leader will decide whether the squad's going to assault, bypass, or break contact. When communicating about that contact, you want to be clear and concise. You're going to give the 3 Ds: distance, direction, and disposition. Now, a lot of people in games will throw out a compass azimuth. We've got enemy at 135. The problem with doing that, 1, is that it's confusing, but 2, the azimuth to the enemy is going to be different for everyone because everyone is in a different direction and is in a different spot. Instead, I recommend that you use a clock direction with regard to the squad's direction of travel. Here's an example of what I mean. So, in this example, you can see that we've got a squad column, fire teams, and wedge. They're moving forward, so that forward direction is 12 o'clock. They start taking contact from an enemy machine gun team on their left side, 100 meters away. The communication there, the 3 Ds, would be contact, 9 o'clock, because it's to the left, 100 meters, enemy gun team. There's a lot more to cover, and these concepts won't really cement themselves until you get on the ground and start practicing them. So for the next class, we're going to put these fundamentals into action. Thanks for your attention, and we'll see you in the training area.